Enjoy. See ya.
Son of a...
Hey, Peter.
Hey, hello. Thank you for joining.
No problem. I appreciate your background.
David Hewlett. Oh, no, there. I thought I put nothing in the background.
I'm not disappointed.
We're talking about Nothing. It's a movie, I think, that is really like no other. It's so special. How did you come up with that idea about the movie Nothing?
Well, it was conceived around the same time that I was working on Cube, which was my first film. And in this time, to be perfectly honest, I was looking for stories that could be told with a minimal number of components. And both David Hewlett and Andrew Miller, who were in the film, were close friends of mine, and actually were the only two professional actors that I knew. So I had constructed several scenarios around casting them exclusively in a movie, and I haven't thought about this in a long time. And there was another one I remember writing a fairly detailed treatment for, which wasn't very good. But Nothing came from that very pragmatic need. And then also, it's probably the most autobiographical thing I've done in a literal sense, because I was living with, not with David and Andrew at that time, but I was living with another close friend of ours, Andrei Bajelic, who I wrote Cube with, in a very small, apartment, not quite as disgusting as the one they live in, but not too far off that mark. And as many people do in their early 20s, I was feeling a bit lost and trapped, frankly. And so these stories of entrapment, I think, kind of tickled my brain. And I remember when I initially conceived of Nothing, I think I imagined the void as being just blackness. It was a little more of a subdued version than we ended up making, but it was that kind of existential scenario of being confronted with nothingness and what that means. And then ultimately, I ended up making Cube, and after Cube had some success, the opportunity arose, and I thought, well, maybe we can do this crazy thing. And so, sorry, I'm giving you a much more lengthy answer than you probably want, but I then, and I've never done this, had never done this before and have never done it since, but I workshopped the script with David and Andrew, and we would improvise scenes together in David's house. He had this sort of small bungalow house, and videotape them. And then that eventually sort of morphed into a script that Andrew wrote with his writing partner, Andrew Lowry. And anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's sort of how it came into being as a script.
So it's kind of brother to Cube, but because you made Cube, this could be the comedy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The flip side of it. I had it was sort of intended to be an informal trilogy. I had another concept called Echo Beach that was going to be the third one. They were going to get progressively more and more minimal.
How can you get more minimal than Nothing?
Echo Beach was just going to have one actor. That was just going to be David. And maybe that'll emerge one day, but I think in the lengthy time since I conceived of it, I feel like there are other things out there that have kind of gone over similar terrain. So I'm not sure if that will ever come to fruition.
Now you choose not to do it in black, but in white, which I think was a good decision, because it gets a lighter mood. I think if it all would have been dark, how was it like shooting in this whiteness? How is it done to shoot in a place that's white and bouncy?
It was very interesting, because although the concept on its face seems ridiculously simple, actually to technically achieve that became rather difficult, and there was a lot of R&D involved. And I was closely aligned with a digital effects company at the time called Core Digital Pictures, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, but they had done Cube. And I actually had my office in their offices, and So there was a lot of thought put into like, how do we create a surface that is flexible, but you can't see, where the actor's feet don't disappear into it. Like, it became, in my mind, when I originally thought of it, I was just like, well, we'll be in a white studio, but it's not that simple, because we didn't want shadows or anything. So there was quite a bit of R&D. It was actually technically rather complex given its scale, and exciting for that reason, but also challenging. And it was accomplished by being in a white studio, but also we created these platforms, these bouncy sort of soft canvas platforms that David and Andrew could walk on to, get that full effect. And then those platforms then had to be digitally painted out. And then we also felt we wanted to give, even though nothing is nothing, it still needed a little something. So we added a bit of glow, as if there was just the ever so subtle kind of effervescent quality to the nothing. And we had to do this all very, very cheaply. So we had a team of young visual effects artists who would work the night shift. And we called them the glow worms. And they would glow the floor, which would eradicate the shadows and then just sort of soften the edges around our actors' feet, so that if they did disappear into the material they were walking on, you didn't feel the absence of their feet.
Were you still experimenting in that phase, doing improvisation, or was that just in the writing?
It was very much in the writing. So what I was leading to it, I didn't want to get too far ahead of myself when you asked that question initially, was that there was a third workshop. So the first thing was sort of me alone. Then it was Andrew and David and myself improvising stuff. And then Andrew Lowry was brought in, and he and Andrew really drafted the script. And then after they did that, we shot it entirely on, at that time, I think it was, dare I say, high 8 digital video. That's how far back this was in time. And we found some ridiculous sitcom set that was like built in a high school here in Toronto, and was available to us for a weekend or 3 days. And we shot the whole movie in this very, very lo-fi way, with just me being the crew and then the guys acting. And we cut it together. So we actually made, and I wish to God I knew where that was. I think it may have been lost, but it probably is good that it was lost, because it wasn't very good. But it was interesting in that we did shoot the movie twice. We shot, well, in a way we shot it 3 times, because the first time was very rough improv version. Then there was a scripted version that we did. And then finally we shot the movie for real on 35mm film. So it was actually, even though it sort of came partly out of these improvisations, by the time we were really shooting it was, very meticulously designed, and everything was storyboarded, etc.
And I think it holds up very well for a movie that's about 20 years old. I watched it recently, and the effects, they still hold up, I think.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear. I to be perfectly honest, I haven't seen it in a long time.
Oh, you should see it. It's so funny.
What's interesting is that you can't really watch it in North America. It's unless you kind of, find it on eBay or something, because it's no longer in distribution. And the rights, it's really my fault. The North American rights have reverted back to myself and my producing partner. So we need to find a way to get it out into the world again.
Yeah, you can do a 20th anniversary edition.
Oh my God, I guess we can. You're right. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah. How was the reception of Nothing?
It was, I must confess, we were a little bit disappointed, because we did feel like whether it was good or not is entirely debatable, but we did feel like we did something very original.
Yep.
And I've since come to learn, sadly, that in this industry, if you don't hit a bullseye, you are punished for being original. There's an I don't know what it is. Maybe it's something to do with human nature, but there's an aversion to something that's not easily digested, I think. And so the critical notices were kind of not awful, but sort of middling. And then our distributor, Frank, which was actually a German company, forgive me, or a producer, I should say, our producer, Senator, the American, but bear in mind, the American arm of it really did not like it. I mean, to their credit, they completely financed it. They're fabulous. But I think when they got the end product, I remember the head senator said, "You promised me a really funny movie." And I was like, I think it's funny, but he didn't think so. So in fact, he disliked it so much. I was going to make an adaptation of a Neil Gaiman book called Neverwhere with them, and they very quickly canceled that deal.
Oh,
so and then in Canada is notorious for just being like the most eating its young. Like we really don't support our own movies, or at least at that time, I don't think. So it was just kind of dumped out there. And in fact, the trailer for it, I remember, tried to sell it like a horror film, which was ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, they just didn't know how to market anyway, it was one of those situations. But as is the case with virtually everything I've ever done, over time, because it was shown on television, especially in Canada quite a bit, it amassed this following. And in all the things I've made, maybe barring Cube or Splice, like it's the one that people always come to me when I'm, bump into people who know I am. So it seems to have had a life. And I sort of feel like if we could kind of get it out there, maybe it would sort of have a second incarnation in the world, and which would be great. So it was a very interesting. I mean, we were insanely lucky because I think we had. I'm trying to remember the budget. I feel like the budget was close to $3 million Canadian, which, when you think about what it is, I don't think we'd ever get that kind of money now. Yeah. It was just at that particular time, and because of Cube, we had a real, a real budget. It wasn't huge, but it was an actual budget where we could build stuff and do all those crazy things. And so I do feel like, although it hasn't didn't become all that I hoped it would be in the world, I feel very lucky to have made it. I'm very happy I made it when I did, because I don't think it could be done now. I truly don't.
I think too. It's a very special movie, and I'm glad you did it. You said it right. The industry, if you have a hit like Cube, then the normal Hollywood thing would be, let's do a prequel and a sequel, what they did. But you choose to do Cypher and nothing. Were you tempted to go to make Cube 2 or?
No. I mean, I was, now actually in my sort of old age, I would have maybe sat myself down, my younger self down, and said, "Now, just a minute, young man, this is a real opportunity." I think I don't think I was wrong to say no to those things, but I think if I were more canny looking back on it, maybe I could have taken the reins of that and turned it into something. But the problem was with Cube, I couldn't see the sequel. Like to me, it was like Jaws. It was sort of like this, people keep trying to do sequels to Jaws, or they do a version of it, and it always ends up being an inferior remake. And I just felt with Cube, there wasn't really another story there. And I guess that's somewhat been borne out by the sequels. Although I thought the third one, they had a very interesting approach to it. But I early on, I just kind of divested myself from it, because I didn't feel like the company Trimark was really going to do something of quality. And and then I was like, in those days, I didn't care about money or anything. I was too young.
Yeah, it's so good that Cube ends ambiguous or just open. I love it, but I read many comments, even on Nothing too, that said it doesn't have a resolution. We don't understand fully what's happening.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. But I understand the frustration. But with both films, my philosophy was, and the philosophy of my co-creators on these things, was always that we would satisfy the puzzle of the story. Like in Cube, we never wanted to be ambiguous about how that puzzle worked and how the characters managed to escape from it. We just didn't want to give a context because we always thought that would just be disappointing and then ultimately less intriguing. And then with Nothing, again, to me, the story we told was the story of these two people. And I felt like their story, as ridiculous as it is, does come to a true emotional resolution. And then the larger question of, well, why is this happening? Or where are they? Or that is very much on the periphery. And I personally don't feel like I need to answer those questions. I always feel like, well, it'd be kind of prosaic or underwhelming if I actually did.
Really, very, very true, I think. You even parodied with the final gag where everything changes again in the last second.
Now, oddly enough, I had a sequel idea for Nothing. I had a whole concept, but it's just the first one hardly was released. So there was no one banging down my door for Nothing 2.
Nothing 2. Yeah, but I think the movies I've seen, Splice and Cube and even Elevated, they work as a genre. They work as comedy or horror or whatever, but they work on another level. Like you said, you were experiencing a situation of a young person feeling lost, and on that level, it completely works and explains.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Also when not to in any way read too much into the film, but I do recall when we started making Nothing as a movie, it was just on the precipice or during the beginning of the Gulf War. And the world just felt, which I just thought was, and of course ended up being one of the most horrendous miscalculations and tragedies of the century. And I felt like I wanted to make a film about, this sounds corny, but about people reconciling and, something that had a little more tenderness to it. Cube is very, almost nihilistic, but I felt I wanted to do something that was about people coming together. And I feel like that informed it. I thought it was funny. It was very interesting to me what kind of movies people were watching at that time, because I thought, well, maybe people will respond to this because there'll be this hunger for, a story about friendship and tenderness. But actually what people really got excited about was torture porn. And it was the opposite, it was very interesting to me. I don't know what that means precisely, but now I wonder what would happen if people were served to revisit it. I think one of the inspirations for Nothing was there's a Canadian experimental filmmaker you might have heard of who used to work at the National Film Board in Canada named Norman McLaren. Mm-hmm. And he made an animated, a pixelated movie. So it was animated, but it was with human beings called Neighbors, mm-hmm. and which is all about human conflict. But it's 15 minutes long, and it's about these two neighbors who build a fence, and then it ultimately becomes kind of a war. You could see it. I'm sure you could find it easily online, but it's terrific. And and I felt like Nothing was sort of, swimming in the same waters.
And I think you've done a lot of TV episodes and stuff like that. Are you working on original material too?
Oh, always, yes.
Yeah. Is it different when you work for a streaming provider than for a movie studio, or is it the same on the production side?
I love streaming. I know it's a lot of debate about what streaming has done to the industry. I mean, I love it because, first of all, they financed my last movie, but it's because there's a lot of creative freedom. And really what's has been happening for the last few years and will continue to happen for a while at any rate is a kind of arms race between the different streamers who are really not looking at the bottom line. They're spending a lot of money and they're not necessarily spending it on the thing that they think will make a lot of money. It's more about claiming territory on this digital landscape and winning that war. And so I think the result of that is that a lot of filmmakers and showrunners and so on are being permitted to do things that by all rights they should not be allowed to do, which is great for everyone. And they're just not, the movie industry, for a variety of reasons I don't want to necessarily bore you with, but has a systemic issue that it has led us to this place where it's very difficult to do original material for any for any reasonable amount of money. I mean, you can do original material for very, very, very low budgets and have it go onto iTunes, but to make the kinds of movies that I grew up watching, that doesn't really exist anymore, and it has as much to do with the way the system has evolved or devolved as anything else. And so the streamers at least are an alternative to that. So Martin Scorsese can make the movie he wants to make that no one else wants to do, or David Fincher or the Coen brothers, or all these people can at least, if it even though they're not really getting a proper theatrical release, they're at least getting to make those movies, and those movies now exist. So and whether I'm in favor of it or not doesn't matter, because that is now the paradigm, and that's just is what it is. So and then for me, directing TV has been great because aside from being able to eat and house myself and my family, it also has put me in contact with really great creative people, and I've been able to work on things. I have never worked on anything that I didn't like that. My sort of rule of thumb is I won't work on a show unless it's something I would watch. And some things I've been very excited about and really feel I've done some of my best work as a director on. So it's good. I just wish I missed that time when people could make original movies and those movies could become cultural events. I don't think that's, with the rare exception, I don't think that's possible anymore. I think really, and I don't see it changing. I think we're in kind of this franchise, which is a word that just sets my teeth on edge. I hate that word, but that's really what it is. It's franchise filmmaking. And that's all the industry can really afford to make. And that's, I think it's created this vicious circle where it's created an appetite for it, where that's all people really know as an audience. They don't have a taste for anything else. It's like they've been eating McDonald's hamburgers their whole, there's a whole generation that have grown up on that stuff. And so they don't know anything else. So they don't want anything else. And it just creates this vicious cycle. And I don't see how that's going to end. I don't think that's changing. I think it's maybe one day, but not anytime soon. So sorry, I can go on and on about this. Yeah. You asked a very simple question. So at the end of the day, I like the streamers because I see that is another way to still create narrative fiction with some creative flexibility and possibility to kind of do new things.
I think the community, as I see on the internet, is very aware when something is just a product and part 700. And I know all these franchises, except of Marvel, they were once movies. Star Wars was a movie. Alien was one movie that people found great, right. And then it piled on, and now people don't see studios want more and more, and people.
It's true. Really, what's happened is movies have become more like television.
Yeah.
In the traditional sense, and television has been more like movies.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
I find the whole thing, as with probably everything that's going on right now in the world, very hard to navigate. I don't quite understand it, and I also believe that this thing, and also what we're communicating on has actually changed people's brain chemistry. And I mean that. I think that I'm sure there's studies that have proved this. I mean, it's just we're not as inclined to sit in a dark room and watch one screen. I just don't see people doing that anymore. And then for the young generation, I don't even think. I just don't think. That's why I really feel like cinema's kind of dead. I don't think with the exception of these, sort of these event movies, which are almost more about saying I went there rather than the thing itself. I don't really see people going to movies anymore. I hope I'm wrong. I sincerely hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Okay. I'm coming to my final question. In your own oeuvre, in your work, do you have a favorite movie of yours?
It's a cliche to say this, but they're like my kids. So it's like trying to choose a favorite kid. And it sort of, it kind of depends on the movie. I mean, I don't really watch my film. I don't watch my own movies all that much because I can only see all the cringeworthy things in them. I prefer to remember. When I remember them, my brain, just like David and Andrew and nothing, edits out all the bad stuff. And I just remember the good things. So I'm always afraid to return to them because I'm afraid of what they really are and what I'll really see. But I mean, Splice is very dear to me. That was such a hard film. It's such a miracle that movie got made. That movie, by all rights, should never have been made. And the fact that I got to do it somehow, and that it actually got this like sizable theatrical release just bends my brain. Like it bends my brain. I feel like some angel came and looked after that movie in that way. It was just it was very, very hard film on every level to make, to write, to make, to distribute, everything. But it always ended up in the best possible place. So that one is very dear, maybe. But I don't know. It's funny. I really like what I did I worked on this show Hannibal, with Brian Fuller as the showrunner, and I felt like some of my best directing is in that show. I feel like, I don't take ownership over it because it was Brian's show, but I feel like as my contribution as a director is some of the best stuff I've done. It truly is like speaking of parenthood, it is really like having kids. You have these things and then they go out in the world and they sort of do things. Like it's such a lovely thing to be able to speak to you in Nuremberg, about this thing that was made 20 years ago. That's magical.
Yeah, it's cool because I just wrote to you, let's see if he answers, and it's so kind of you to talk to a channel with 70 subscribers and the smallest movie channel.
That's where I belong. No, it's really it's so lovely, Peter. Thank you. And nothing is, it's one of the children that didn't get the attention I felt it deserved. So it's just wonderful to be able to speak about it.
Oh,
and David and Andrew and I remain very, very close friends. So it's a chapter in an ongoing story, that we have. I just did something again with David, which was really fun. So I always have very warm feelings towards that movie.
He's kind of, I don't know, it's a good thing that he recurs in so many of your movies.
Yeah.
It's so nice to have him there. It's like a little universe.
Totally. And he always lights it. Like any time he's in one of my films, I always feel like he lights it up. He just, but the new thing I did was for Guillermo del Toro. He has a horror anthology that he's doing with Netflix. And I wrote an episode and David is the lead in it, which was very nice. But I haven't been able to have him as a lead character in a long time. And it's almost a one-man show. I mean, a lot of it is just him. And he's just fantastic.
He's such a great actor. He could have, I don't know, he didn't want to be a superstar or it just didn't happen. He's so great in everything he does.
I think he's evolved, and he's had a very good few years actually. And I think, as he would happily tell you, the less hair he has and the more fat he has on him, the better he gets. Like the roles get more interesting. He's just up. I think before people were trying to make him into a lead actor a little bit or a leading man, and I think his real place is as a character actor. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Maybe now it's absolutely the right time to rewatch Nothing, because it's a bit like an antidote to all those terrible things in the world.
Thank you for saying. Yeah, no, I feel the same way. Yeah. It's interesting moment. Anyway, all right, Peter. Well, thank you so much. Danke.
Thank you.